Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are all having a great time at the summit. Thank you all for joining us for the 22nd edition of the World Sustainable Summit, India's premier platform for deliberating the discourse around sustainability and climate change. As we proceed further, it is my great privilege to host you all on behalf of the entire WSDS and TERI family. My name is Shireen Pandita, and I will be hosting you all for this last session of the day on accelerating business actions for realizing sustainable development goals. We now have Mr. Manish Chourasia, Managing Director and CEO, Tata Clean Tech Capital Limited, as the moderator for the session. I welcome you, sir. Please join us on the dais. Can we have a round of applause, please? I would now request Ms. Soma Mondal, Chairperson, Steel Authority of India Limited, to join us on the dais as well. We have a wonderful speaker list with us, and I would one by one call them upon the stage, and I would request them to please come on the dais as well. We have with us Mr. Rasmus Valenko, Managing Director, We Mean Business Coalition. Mr. Naveen Unni, Partner, McKinsey and Company. Mr. Sandeep Bhatia, Managing Director, Capgemini Invest India, TBC. We also have Mr. Girish Sethi, Senior Director, TERI, with us, who will be giving us the concluding remarks. I extend my warmest welcome to all of you. I would request the moderator for the session, Mr. Chourasia, to please take it forward.
Very good evening, esteemed audience. Very warm welcome to all of you in this session. Important topic, mainstreaming sustainable development, accelerating business action for realizing sustainable development goals. We know we are standing between you and dinner, so we'll be surely crisp and sharp. We are very lucky to have with us a very stellar speakers, and I'm sure they will add a lot of value to our discussions. Now, when it comes to business, it's important to realize that business houses are big. If you take the top 100 economies in terms of GDP and revenues, 60 are countries, 40 are actually business houses. So clearly, the trajectory which they decide to take on development, which hugely decide whether the development going forward is sustainable or not. Now, not only they are big, but if you see the major segments of concern, like say carbon emission, or usage of plastic, or usage of water, the segments which are responsible for this, whether it is power sector, whether it is industrial processes, whether it is just building or transportation, or even agriculture, everything, most of them are controlled by the businesses. So clearly, businesses have very important role to play. Now, traditionally, when a business was valued, it was always on the basis of what is called the accounting cash flows. Now, with the experience of last 2-3 decades, we are realizing that in those accounting cash flows, we have actually missed out a most important cost. The cost which is incurred in terms of the damage we have caused to the planet. But the good news is that whether it is investors, or it is civil society, or it is government, everyone is realizing this and have shown their commitment to work towards addressing this. The other good news is that if you see the last few years, number of corporates, number of business houses have actually given huge commitments. And there has also been a lot of action on the ground. Apart from this, investors today are valuing those companies much higher which are conscious on ESG, which can be seen from the market valuations. And then the good news is also on the technology. The technology is developing, and we do believe that at least 60 to 70% of the projects on the clean tech sector are today viable because of sheer improvement in technology. So the trajectory is right, but then are we moving fast enough? There the answer is clearly that we are a bit late. When a carbon budget of only 8% is left, then probably what we are doing is something probably we should have done a decade back, or maybe even earlier. So given this macro scenario, what can be done to accelerate business actions so that we meet our sustainable development goals? In my view, there are 3 actions. I'm talking as a green investment banker and based on my experience working in Tata Clean Tech Capital, which I think are must-have. Of course, there are a number of things which are to be done. Some are good to have, some are must-have. And in my address, I want to talk about those 3 factors, which I think are indispensable. The first, I think, is clearly disclosures. Now, business houses today make a lot of disclosures. But when it comes to disclosure on sustainability, a lot of progress has happened. A lot of standards have been developed, which are great standards. GRI, TCFD, and now in IFRS has come out with a standard. But then those business houses are in minority. We know in practical life that something which is not measured is never monitored. So I think measurement is the key. And this is one area where regulations need to evolve, where the business houses need to show better intent in terms of improving their disclosure, whether it is on carbon footprint or plastic footprint or water footprint. They also need to invest a lot on the skill sets for this. Today, the skill set itself is not there. Today, if you go to a company, while their intent is to find their footprints, but they find it very difficult to get the manpower who can do it. So this is, I think, issue number 1. And related issue is that if you have found your footprint, the next step is clearly the abatement. Now here, I think, in general, things are clear. What is green, what is not green. But sometimes what is green can also be in the shades of gray. So it is important to have a uniform taxonomy so that we avoid the issue of greenwashing. And so that we are very clear what is green and what is not green. I think this is one step, which is a very basic step, and which needs to be taken. And if this step is taken, it will go a long way in accelerating business actions. The second issue I want to talk about is very fundamental of any macroeconomics, which is how do you price scarcity? If something is scarce, if what we can emit to the environment is scarce, then by common sense logic, it should be priced. Now here again, good news is that some countries have taken initiative. But at the same time, we have geographies where leave pricing, the carbon is actually subsidized. The carbon fuel is subsidized. So I think this is one area where probably it is in the realm of regulations, but something needs to be done. If we understand the scarcity of something, and if we price it, then definitely improvements will happen because technologies have developed. The third issue which I want to talk about is facilitating climate finance. Now today, the fact is that climate finance is not a macroeconomic issue. Because if we take global savings, they are upwards of $20 trillion or around that figure. And requirement for fighting climate change and for improving the climate in general, the planet in general, is the requirement of fund there is hardly 4 to 5 trillion US dollars, just about 25% of the global savings. So it's clearly not a macroeconomic issue. I think the key issue is that most of the savings we talk about are in the developed world, in the global north, while the requirement is in global south. So the issue is clearly the issue of capital flows. And we need to see how we can facilitate those capital flows. Now, when it comes to capital flows, the good news is that some of it will happen naturally because the technologies have developed and the projects are viable. So in my view, based on our research, we feel that out of this 5 trillion or so funds which are required, at least 60 to 65% will happen naturally if the projects are viable, and the projects are viable. But there are certain responsibilities which the developing countries will have and certain responsibilities which the developed world will have. When it comes to developing countries, we will have to see how we can ensure that ease of business is improved, how the contracts are properly enforced, so that capital flows by itself. Today, the hard reality is that whatever technologies we are working on have a very high capital cost. But at the same time, the variable costs are low because everything is based on nature. Sunlight is the natural resource, wind is the natural resource, tidal waves are natural resource. So the all cost is upfront. And that cost return comes over a long period of time. At the same time, technology keeps improving. So naturally, the technology of tomorrow will be of lower cost. But if the old contracts are reneged because of that, then probably capital flows will not happen. I think this is one area where one has to work. The other is, a lot of these projects take a lot of land. So how can we facilitate easy access to land? Then, if you have to do a development of project, you need manufacturing ecosystem. How can we develop manufacturing ecosystem? I think this is where Global South has to work on. When it comes to Global North, where we have huge savings, I think one thing should be very clear, that the capital which is flowing naturally should never be taken as something which is coming because of their efforts. It's a capital system because of which capital is coming. I think where they can make a huge difference is funding those business models or technologies which are yet to develop. Funding those technologies. We are betting so much on green hydrogen, on carbon capture and storage. Seeing how these technologies can go to Global South, how can the business models be developed so that these technologies can be used? That is number one. Number two is that when these flows happen, they actually happen in dollars. Today, the ironical thing is that when they happen in dollars, the risk is being taken by those players, by those borrowers who don't have the ability, nor they have the understanding of this risk. I'm talking about the forex risk. The requirement of all this money is in local currency because revenues are generated in local currency, but the money comes in foreign currency. And unfortunately, even the multilateral institutions, leave the international capital market, even the multilateral institutions, when they lend money, they lend in dollars. And in my view, this is a big policy failure. And this has led to huge defaults. And this will only go up if green financing takes momentum and the money goes in foreign currency to developing countries. Clearly, we need some solution for hedging. Today, while there's a huge hedging market globally, but that is concentrated in very few currencies. I think the developing world currencies hardly is 1% of the total trading. A lot needs to be done there. Can we think of some agency which will mitigate this risk? Can we think of some agency which will also do peripheral things like taxonomy and also guide nations on the quality of disclosure? Can we have something which will encourage venture capital for new technologies? I think these things are imperative. So these are my broad thoughts, which I think are must-have. And now I would like to invite Ms. Soma Mondal, Chairperson, Steel Authority of India Limited, to deliver the keynote address. Over to you, ma'am.
Madam, it's up to you. Thank you, Mr. Chourasia. Mr. Rasmus Velanko, Mr. Navinuni, Mr. Bhatia, and I think I'm missing out. But, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm indeed delighted to be sharing this platform with such distinguished panel of CEOs and subject experts. They are audience from across the globe, and to speak on a very topical agenda of World Sustainable Development Summit 2023. The current geopolitical and geoeconomical developments, which are likely to impact adversely the compliance of SDG goals and timelines, makes this summit very relevant. The World Risk Report 23 sets out cost of living to be the most serious global risk and outcome of the global pandemic and the war in Europe. These crises have put enormous demand on the public and private sector resources to the social economic sectors, leading to reduced speed and scale of climate mitigation efforts. In fact, the power crisis has led to the refocus on fossil fuel infrastructure, which has led to the reversal of the progress on the climate change mitigation, at least in the short term. In the medium term of the next 10 years, the report indicates that 6 out of top 10 global risks will be pertaining to climate and environmental, including failure to mitigate climate change and failure of climate change adaptation. There has been a unanimous view that technology would play a vital role in accelerating climate adaptations and percolation of benefits to a large number of people. The future solutions will be technology-driven and innovation-based. And here is where corporates come in. There has been discussion to make innovations public goods if the benefits have to be percolated to the bottom of the pyramid. While transition will not be immediate, the unanimity of creating the desired protocol and timeline needs to be arrived. The government of India has adopted several policies and initiatives to promote sustainable development, limit climate change, enhance renewable energy generation, conserve natural resources, including water, integrate circular economy, and conserve biodiversity. Mainstreaming sustainable development and climate resilience means integrating these principles in all aspects of decision-making and planning from local to global levels. In COP26 summit held in Glasgow in 2012, Honorable PM of India has committed India to an ambitious 5-part pledge to realize the Sustainable Development Goals, which include specific targets on increased non-fossil electricity capacity, renewable energy, reduced emission by volume and intensity. We have also committed that India would be net zero by 2070. Today, India is in the cusp of 2 significant transformations. The first is the economic transformation. In order to meet the growth and lifestyle aspirations of 1.4 billion people, the manufacturing sector will have to grow to supplement the impressive service sector economy and cater to the large population of this country. The Lifestyle for Environment mission, launched in October 22, gives special focus to the impact of individual behavior and consumption habits that have on the planet and encourages the adoption of environmentally sustainable lifestyles. And the second important transformation which India is now is the green transformation. India's per capita energy use today is low. Unlike developed nations with major greenhouse gases infrastructure, India is yet to build a lot on the CGH inventory. However, as India grows, so will it see the greenhouse gas footprint will also grow. India will need breakthrough technology to meet this aspirational target. Business actions for accelerating green revolution in India will necessarily implicate the various sectors that contribute to almost all, the few sectors which I will speak on, to almost all the greenhouse gas emissions, most of it. And I belong to one of them, that is steel. The first would be the energy. In the India energy sector, we have already planned how we will move into the renewable very fast. But in spite of everything, there would be a lot of requirement of carbon capture and utilization, which is still commercially unviable, and technologies have yet to come in to make it viable. The mobility is another sector which is heavily reliant on oil. And then come industry. Industry manufacturing is a key contributor of India's CGS emission, and iron and steel, cement, chemical, fertilizer sector have the highest carbon footprints. A radical decarbonization of these sectors will mean this will need a demand management measures such as a circular economy acceleration. Here the industry is working on this. The government is also working on this. Continued energy efficiency improvements. I will speak a little on what we are doing similarly on steel. In general, this is electrification of heat, carbon capture and utilization and storage, low carbon fuels such as biomass and hydrogen. It's very easily said. Just before the discussion, in fact, I was speaking to Mr. Uni about steel sector. What do we do in steel sector? The steel industry is hard to abate sector. Presently, the level of emission is 2.6 to 2.8 tons average. Like the DRI sector has more emission, the electric arc furnaces has less than 1, the BF has around 2.5. But what do? We adapt, the paths to carbon neutrality would be to adapt the low-hanging fruits. This is just an example. Other industries are also doing similarly. We have low-hanging fruits like already established technologies like dry coke quenching in place of wet quenching, top pressure recovery turbines, waste heat recovery incinerators, and BFs, all these energy-saving technologies which capture all the heat which is being released. And also what we do is the raw material, how we can beneficiate so that the slag is less, so that our BF productivity is high. How do we use enhanced scrap-based electric arc furnace steel making? The problem with the national steel scrap and vehicle scrappage policy is will help once it's actually implemented in the states. But as of today, India being quite a young country, so far as steel consumption goes, we do not have too much steel here. Injection of natural gas or coke oven gas in BF as a transition pathway before switching over to H2 and DRI. Whether there has been research on how to use hydrogen in blast furnaces, it has still not been really viable. It's still in the research stage. We more thrust on circularity so that we produce those steel which can be circular like structural, a building which is made of pure steel, like instead of using less of concrete, so that you can reuse it, because once you're using a rebar and a conventional building, it's difficult to reuse. Biodiversity conservation, etc., etc. These are the things which we are trying, but these are the just. It will help us reduce from 2.5 to less than 2. What about the rest? For blast furnace integrated steel manufacturers which we produce. So it is about steel. It's not only about steel, it is about other industry also. Other industries would be having similar challenges. So now we look at carbon, how do we capture carbon, how do we utilize carbon. Here, a lot of support from the government towards policy, towards infrastructure would be required, that once you, when we capture carbon, when sequestration of carbon, if you are putting it in the wells, the coal gas methane wells, then the geotagging of the wells, or how the wells, whether the wells are suitable, all the study needs to be done. SAIL, we are working closely with the IIT Bombay and other institutes working on how that can be done. See, what has happened is the timeline has been given 2070. We know where we need to reach. we know, but we do not know, the steel industry doesn't know how to reach there, and there where we all are working on. So here, the following strategies and approaches can be adopted by corporates to accelerate progress on sustainability goals. The first thing which the corporate should understand, where we in steel industry realize that when we are looking towards reducing carbon consumption, carbon footprint, we are using coke consumption and using better technology, which is increasing our techno-economics, it's reducing our costs, making us more efficient. So we have to emphasize that there is a business case in adopting sustainability. That's the most important. The moment the business starts accepting it, that it is a business case, we will all work towards it. Ultimately, we are there to make profit. So first, we have to accept that. Second is we should have incorporate sustainable development goals into the business strategy. Then also implement sustainable practices in our core business operations. Have establishing some sustainability metrics. This is very important because you keep on saying you're doing, but where's the metrics? How are you going to calculate where you are? So that becomes very important. Then you also have, promoting sustainable supply chains, encouraging collaboration and partnership. And again is adopting a long-term perspective. Like today, if I'm looking at our plants are old, or many of our plants are old, like Bokaro and others are old plants. So when we are looking at like we want to have a change in any blast furnace, or then what we say is refurbish a blast furnace. Or we say, well, let us look at the whole picture. Where do we want as a plant, not as a blast furnace, as a plant, where do we want to reach? And if we want to reach at a particular level of carbon dioxide emission, then what we need to do as a whole. So this is where we are working on, and I'm sure the industry, the whole industry, we all know that we do not have time. The time is too short. Though it sounds 2070 is far, we have to start working very fast. But here, it is very important that the incentivization of greening effort by the government and helping of, having some green funds, these efforts will go a long way in accelerating the mainstream. These are a requirement. Secondly, if you're looking at hydrogen, the question of whether hydrogen network, or even if you're looking at carbon capture, do you have a carbon network for having the geotagged wells, putting it in the geotagged wells? All that whole infrastructure needs to be built. I'm absolutely confident that this 3 days Sustainable Development Summit, across the plenaries, expert session, dialogues, network sessions, and inspirational talks will provide an opportunity to delegates across the globe to deliberate, document, and disseminate strategies for shaping global solutions in the spirit of improving the world and explore way to take control of our fate through collective actions. Friends, we have damaged the universe enough, our Earth, Mother Earth enough. It's time we all realize. And I think it's most important for the business to think about it and first accept that this is what is a business case. If you feel that this is something which is being forced on you, you would not be able to do it in the way it would. It's a business case. You look at it that way, you will surely be able to reach the destination in a very comfortable journey. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, madam. Wonderful address. And you raised so apt points. And you concluded very well by saying that there has to be a business case. Thank you so much for this. I would now invite Mr. Rasmus Velenko for his leadership address. Mr. Rasmus Velenko is Managing Director, We Mean Business Coalition.
Thank you for having me. The bar has been set high during the course of today. We've had many distinguished speakers who have delivered both powerful and insightful messages to this audience. I want to start with a brief story just An anecdote. So 15 years ago, I was in the same room. At the time, I worked for the government of Finland. I was just a junior functionary, so I was at the back, not up here at the front. And since then, I decided that I'd move out of government. You know, after university, I thought government is the place where change happens, right? But having been there for a while, working on things like, you know, the UNFCCC process, I decided that maybe actually the place where it's happening is business. So I moved into business. And I spent quite a few years there as well. Now I'm in an NGO, we mean business. And, you know, I feel like I've come full circle. And just hold that thought to the end, that story. I'll continue that and finish off that story at the very end. So who is We Mean Business? We Mean Business is a coalition. We work with very large companies like an Amazon or a Mahindra or Unilever, but we also work with the small and medium-sized enterprises, the thousands in our network, but the millions which form the backbone of economies, like here in India as well. And we work with these companies to have emissions by 2030. That's what we need to do globally. We need to have emissions every decade to get there. But why are we doing this? It's been mentioned before. We absolutely have to harness the power of business if we stand a chance to combating climate change. It's the companies, it's business that will invest and implement the solutions to climate change. We can't solve it without business. That's why I believe that we're a very important, not just organization, but a force for good. So many companies are already taking action. I mean, there's thousands of companies already who have shifted their strategies to align with sustainability and climate change. They're essentially taking this public goods approach. They've moved from thinking about, you know, just shareholders to the broader stakeholders. What is their impact on these stakeholders and their livelihoods as well? We've seen a big B Corp movement as well, where it's not just about making the money. Well, it is. But the money is there so you can have an even bigger positive impact. And we're seeing many companies with sustainability being really at the core of their new product development as well. So we've seen a shift, and I've been privileged to be part of that shift as well when I've worked in companies. But it's not enough to have just a few thousand companies taking action. You know, we need millions. And as companies start their journey on climate action and sustainability, they need guidance, and that's what we're there for. We provide this. We have right now tried to simplify as much as possible. It can be complicated, you know, as a company. What should I do? They're saying I should have this standard or that standard. I should be counting these numbers or those numbers. Are offsets good or bad? We've tried to simplify this in the 4 A's of climate leadership. First A is ambition. You need to set a target, a direction which is aligned with the science. The second A is action. You need to be doing, walking the talk as well. The third A is advocacy. We have to use our voice as businesses to provide confidence to the governments that these things can be done and that we can go further and faster together. And the last A is accountability, which is incredibly important. Companies have to transparently disclose how they're progressing on their plans as well. On ambition, you know, at the moment we have about 10,000 companies who have set science-based targets through the Science Based Targets Initiative, or they're parts of the SME Climate Hub. These are both, you know, two initiatives that we helped set up as We Mean Business. And in India already we have over 100 companies who've set science-based targets as well. And if you think about the SME Climate Hub, it's going to be incredibly important for India in particular. 27% of GDP comes from, you know, SMEs and micro SMEs. That's 111 million jobs as well. We're going to be launching the SME Climate Hub here in India in April, so stay tuned for that as well. On action, the interesting thing is that companies have to take individual responsibility for their operations, of course, but there's a growing realization that they can go further, faster together. So taking collaborative action. And a lot of the projects that we're doing around the world, and also here in India, are around this collective voice of business using that, particularly on the demand side, which was highlighted earlier. So creating that business case for the supply side to invest in the new technologies and facilities they need. Already today we have in RE100, so that's companies who have committed to being 100% renewable for their energy needs. 75 companies here in India alone. Companies, big companies like Tata or Ultratech Cement. The hard-to-abate sectors are also being tackled. It's not just about what we say, the early movers, the early sectors. We have to also tackle sectors like steel, which was earlier mentioned, but also concrete. And here we have also working with the climate group here in India to launch both Steel Zero and Concrete Zero to show that there is a market for these products, the early movers. But I want to talk a little bit about government as well. Government has a huge role. They can also help to provide the right signals. If we're talking about demand signals, green public procurement can have a big role in many countries in terms of incentivizing some of the first investments, creating that market and the business case. And that's one theme, that we have, is business needs government support to be able to make the right investments fast enough. But it's not just one way. Governments also need businesses' support. We saw this, actually where We Mean Business was formed was in the run-up to the Paris Agreement. And in the Paris Agreement, what we did was we rallied the voice of business to call for a more ambitious Paris Agreement. We were actually quite successful in this in terms of aligning the message from the progressive businesses. And we've seen this time again in the EU, the Fit for 55 package, or in the US on the IRA. There's a huge power of business to provide that confidence to governments. But what's clear is it's not just that business needs government or government needs business. We actually need to work together if we want to transform the economic systems to something which is sustainable. As an example, in India, we just heard the mention, blast furnaces. It's expected that in the next 30 years, $265 billion would need to be invested to refurbish these blast furnaces. There's also a huge risk of stranded assets, if you think about a climate change perspective. We can avoid that risk, of course, by having plenty of the solutions which were mentioned, but particularly hydrogen direct reduction. And it's the policies that are going to play a critical role here. We have about 2 or 3 years in India to put the policy framework in place so that we have a carbon market and a carbon price to help incentivize the investments in the right kinds of technologies so we don't lock in stranded assets. So there's a strong business case to work together. Business can help governments achieve the targets. Governments can help businesses create the business case. In India, we did our own analysis and research. We found that India could accelerate the move to clean energy. And by accelerating, there could be an additional 10% of GDP for the taking compared to business as usual by 2025. That's 15.4 million additional jobs as well. So there's a business case on both sides, definitely. I want to commend Indian leadership. I've heard a lot about it today, but I've also seen it internationally. We have the National Green Hydrogen Mission, which has been mentioned a couple of times today, and big investments in renewables, energy efficiency. These are all in the recent budgets. But also in the international space, we've heard India calling for a phase down of all fossil fuels. And the reason why this leadership is important is that the mission that we're on is urgent, the mission that we're on together. And it's urgent because it's not about more meetings talking about what needs to be done. We actually need to implement some of these things on the ground. To stand a chance of staying under 1.5 degrees, we need to have, for example, 300 sustainable aviation fuel plants built across the world by 2030. Or, steel, 70 near zero emission steel plants. We have to choose now, where are we going to build those? Who are the customers going to be? How are we going to finance those projects? That's the urgency. And my key message here today is that when you're choosing these investments, you need to have a plan. So leadership is not, it's about getting things done, essentially, at its most simple place. We need to get these plans up and running. So we need clear and tangible plans. And we can't do this alone. We need shared plans, not just individual companies, but companies working hand in hand with governments, international level, but more importantly, national and subnational levels. Because it's only with a clear and detailed plan that you can be held accountable to your citizens, to the voters, or to your customers as the companies. At the moment, the way I see it is that we have thousands of companies who stand ready to create these implementation plans with international bodies, national and subnational governments. So my call to this audience and beyond is that let's turn these thousands of companies into millions of companies. That's what we need. We need millions of companies creating the public goods. And we can do this in partnership with all levels of government. So I asked you to retain a thought at the very beginning. The reason I've come to this conclusion is that, I tried government, I tried business, and they can do great things on their own. But it's the scale of the challenge that we have ahead of us. The scale of transformation is one that we have to work together. And we have to work together on very concrete and detailed plans. It's only that way that we can actually figure out where are we going to build these things, where are we going to invest, so we stand a chance of staying under 1.5. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valenko. Clearly we need a tangible plan, we need a shared plan, and not just for 1,000 companies, for millions of companies. Very well said. Thank you so much. I would now invite Mr. Naveen Unni, partner McKinsey and Company, to deliver the leadership address.
Clearly see that the applause is getting a bit muted. It's past 8:30. No, it's okay. I wasn't asking for it. It's fine. I'm just saying, I have to say, it's such a game audience that's here after such a power-packed day you've all had. So thank you. Thank you for being here and for listening to us. And also thank you to my fellow panelists, to Manish, and I'm sure Mr. Bhatia and Mr. Sethi as well, coming at the end of this. This has I've learned a lot just listening to you all. I have a few things to say today. I think some of them will be repeated, and I'll call those out as the ideas are beginning to converge in this space. But let me start right at the top. One of the things that we did last year as McKinsey India was invest in a year of research to write a report on India decarbonization. It's in the public domain. You can find it. It's 244 pages. So I could take an hour to go through it, but I'm going to do it in 2 minutes. So here's my 2-minute pressy version of it. Because that, I think, will inform what I have to say next. India is in quite a unique position. 3/4 of India is yet to be built over the next 50 years. And in some ways, what Ms. Mandal said, which is, where's the scrap steel to put up 8x capacity, right? If I wanted to make it all H2DRI, how am I going to do it, is a very real one. But it is the most unique opportunity that is in the world. When Rasmus, for example, talked of stranded assets, not a real issue for us. If you look at our power plant capacity, we have a very young fleet, about 12 years or 15 years on average, somewhere between that age. You'd say it's a young fleet. We're going to end up with stranded assets. But we need 8x more power to power all the electric vehicles we're going to have, all the growth that we as a country are going to do. Even in the most balanced, sane projections, 3/4 of India is yet to be built over the next 50 years. It is a once in a lifetime, once in a universe opportunity that India has. But we have to do it right. We have to build it green, and every asset that comes from here on has to be green. We did some projections. We said, listen, we are at 2.9 gigatons of carbon a year. If you take the 2019 as the baseline, we're continuing to grow. By the way, 2.9 has become 3.2 and so on. But what does it look like if we achieve the Honorable Prime Minister's stated ambition of net zero by 2070? The first message was news is not good. On current course and speed, if we assume all the things that we are saying will happen, we will get to about 1.9 gigatons of carbon by 2070. So it's good. It's better than what we are. I mean, imagine the GDP has grown so much and intensity has definitely gone down, which is how you get to 1.9, but it's nowhere near good enough because we have to get to net zero. So we then assumed a few things accelerate. We assumed that technology can get there faster. We assumed that policy changes can happen. We assumed that really hard to abate sectors like steel, cement, or agriculture, we can find ways to abate. Where would we get to? And we got to about 0.4 gigatons of carbon per year by 2050, not just 2070, by 2050. So we can actually get there in an accelerated fashion. And if we did that, our gift to the world and our gift to India would be 287 gigatons of carbon space, which is about half the space required to get to an even chance of 1.5 degree centigrade warming. I mean, we're looking at that as success now. So, hey, we'll take that, right? We'll at least give that much back for ourselves and for the world. So that's what we found. However, getting to that is very, very hard. So I'm not trying to talk over the challenges of it. But we have an even bigger benefit if we get there. So we did a couple of analysis around this. So we said, what happens to cost of power? Cost of power goes down from 6 rupee 15 paise per kilowatt hour to about 5.15 to 5.45 in real terms when we get to renewable. So actually power costs come down. What happens to our forex? We actually save something like 1.7 trillion cumulative forex because we will not be importing as much crude because we'll be using renewable. Like Manish said, we won't be needing to, we'll have variable costs zero essentially, so we can save all of that. We looked at the household, the average, not even just take someone that's the average middle class household, and on the whole we'll do better. So steel will cost a bit more, cement will cost a bit more, so cost of building will be higher, but you'll save money on fuel and on power, which is a big part of the overall cost. And so you'll actually, the household will be fine. So it makes sense. India is actually better off by going green. India is in a unique position to go green. Like Manish said, many of the technologies are in the money. Fantastic. So we should all declare this conference a success and go home because tomorrow it'll happen. But unfortunately not. And there are many, many challenges that we have to overcome. The two challenges that we found in a report we did last year at a global level were economic and social. And we found that technology has progressed significantly. Renewables are in the money. Great. Electric vehicles getting in the money in many cases and with some incentive push actually in the money. For example, in India, two-wheelers are mostly in the money and at some point, four-wheelers will get there. But the challenge, the real challenge is around the economic and the social. And Manish talked a lot about the economic side of it, the global north to south capital flow. Rasmus talked about stranded assets. So even within a geography, how do you actually invest in the next tranche of green infrastructure is challenging. But I want to talk about the social challenge. I want to talk about what it will take for citizens, you, me, and everyone else who is used to a good life and will find it hard to get past it. All the others who will get there, which we cannot deny, and they will want that life. How do we all adapt? How do our companies adapt? Because they're also used, and as other panelists have said, business cases have to be made for this. And how do governments adapt? And on the social side, I think that transformation is actually going to become increasingly hard because we'll sort out some of the technological shifts, but that transformational aspects of it can be quite challenging. And I want to come from a place of optimism because we can all kind of look at this and say, oh my God, this is so hard. But one thing I've always believed, even in a consulting career or something a mentor told me many, many years ago, we always overestimate what we can do in 1 year and we always underestimate what we can do in 10, right? So I'm taking that as my motto. And I want to give you two examples of transitions that happened that were believed to be very hard when they started. You'll think, what is the connection? Completely unreal, but just stay with me here. The first is CFCs. People remember CFCs, right? Chlorofluorocarbons, and the whole Montreal Protocol and how countries, companies, people came together. Now you could argue it's a very, very small shift. But at that time, if you were in that moment and looking at that ozone hole getting bigger, you would recognize the sheer challenge of it all. How do we shift this? We don't have a technology around it. Multiple countries have to come together. And we did it. To an extent, we did it. Right? It happened. I just want to call that out as one example of a transformation that happened. To whatever extent it happened, Countries came together, regulations did shift, something happened. And I want to come closer home, and I want to come to something completely different. The quality journey. Again, I don't know if you bought a car, an Indian-made car in the early 2000s to now. That sector has made a phenomenal shift in quality. How did that happen? Because quality is not just what I do in my factory. I have to shift the entire supply ecosystem. They all have to see quality. I have to be able to produce a world-class product. I'll take another sector in pharma, it's happened. So many journeys like this have felt very hard at the outset, but they have happened. So why not this one? What are the features of these journeys that have made the difference? For first, multi-year journeys with a clear goal that many parties came around and said, we have to do this, there is no option. Some sort of a roadmap and the knowledge that things are going to be hard, there'll be ups and downs, valleys and troughs, and there'll be highs, there'll be lows, but we will keep at this because this is fundamentally important to our sector, to our industry, to our country, to the world. And if that kind of commitment we can bring here, we can see that. But how do we get to that roadmap? How do we get to, for example, right now, as many of you know, we don't have a roadmap. We have, but it's not really a roadmap. So can we start creating that and putting that level of rigor behind what we want to do? So that's one set of examples. The second set of examples, and it's very funny that I as a consultant serve a lot of companies, and I'm going to talk about something completely different, policy. Because the reality about this world, as different, for example, the digital transformation or other transformations that have happened in the past, is that this world requires significant capital. And for capital transformation to happen, you need incentives or you need some sort of a policy shift. Otherwise, it just will not happen. It's very hard to put capital for 40 years without some sort of regulatory certainty or policy certainty, because that's the kind of challenge that we have right now. And I want to call out two very different examples. You have the European example where regulatory-driven or customer pressure-driven shifts have happened. Or I'll give you the US example where last year the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. Inflation Reduction Act is, many economists call this, the largest single economic policy since Woodrow Wilson's New Deal, which is right after the World War. So it's a big shift that at some level we are seeing. And both of these are very different ways of acting. And in some way, I would say, whether you use policy to incentivize new capital in infrastructure, new capital in green infrastructure, or whether you use regulation, we don't have a choice. We have to use both. And so putting all of this together, I have three thoughts, submissions, which we have done this in the report. We have also talked about this with many players in this space across government, central, state, ministries, etc. But three things. The first, we do need a roadmap. We can't fly blind because many things are required. And for example, should municipal solid waste go into sustainable aviation fuel or go into regular fuel is a big choice because sustainable aviation fuel is very hard to create otherwise. Sorry? It's very hard to create otherwise. So that's one, the first part of it, which is where is our roadmap? The second, I do think we need every single infrastructure piece that we put in now has to be green because that's the challenge for us. We need about $12 trillion of investment over the next 30 years, right, to get to net zero. For $12 trillion is about 3.5% to 6% of our GDP. It's not massive because other countries have to put much higher parts of their GDP into green investments. 3.5% to 6%. But how do we incentivize this? For example, should we be thinking about putting a carbon price for some of these investments that have to come up in this decade? Because otherwise those investments will go back into brown or gray infrastructure, not green infrastructure. And the third is how do we think about continuing regulation? For example, extended producer regulation that's working in plastics or in consumer durables, but do it in a way where we are supporting industry. When norms like this are coming up without the necessary supply side infrastructure, companies are really struggling with this. So we've got to up regulation, but equally we've also got to provide the support for that regulation to be achieved. And that part is somehow missing and we need to be doing both of these. So in summary, I think we have a lot of optimism. We are in a very unique position as India, but we've got to make some of these shifts now in this decade because like Rasmus said, a lot of those plants once built now have a 30, 40-year life and then they will become stranded assets. So this is our time, this is our opportunity. Let's act now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Naveen. Very comprehensive address. And I have seen the report of McKinsey. It's a fabulous report. All of you should go through it. We are past our time, but that's fine. We have wonderful speakers, but I would just request you to be a little short. I would now like to invite Mr. Sandeep Bhatia, Managing Director, Capgemini Invest India, for his leadership address.
Thank you. I'll be very short. I heard people are hungry, okay. So I heard you. So again, thanks, and I won't repeat all the stuff, okay? Something which resonated with me in the last session, and I'm not sure how many things, there was a question, how did I get bankrupt? It said gradually and then suddenly, okay? So it just resonated with me, and I think that sort of tells us the challenge. So at Capgemini, similar to what Unni said, we keep doing a lot of research, and we said, what can we do as a group to identify what are the 6 themes for the future? And we sort of agreed or heard something, hydrogen, bio, economy, gigafactories, electrification, carbon capture actually came up in a big way, and also smart grids. These are the 6 themes we work on at Capgemini. And if you want me to leave 3 messages, just put it down into 3 areas: commit, act, and monitor, okay? There were a lot of discussions on how do we get advocacy, how do we create a business case. That's all part of the commit, okay? How do you sort of work in getting the commitment in an organization? How do you build a culture on sustainability? How do you make sure that everyone thinks about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, okay? And we build sort of a control around that. In the act, and it's very sort of fuzzy, okay? How do you design for circularity, okay? How do you look at your IT asset and say, yes, how can I go to clean tech or green IT? How can I reduce the green premium? Because that's going to be a big business case in itself. How can I look at my supply chain and say, I will have green supply chain? And the last part, monitor, is very clear. How can I have ESG? It's just not for compliance, getting funding, but also to make sure that internally we're looking at everything which impacts the ESG on the 17 parameters. How do we look at carbon as a key differentiator in all our discussions, okay? In fact, I can tell you, at Capgemini, we take it very seriously. 60% of the power we use is solar, okay? And we sort of generate and give it back to the grid. We have an energy command center in Bangalore, which looks at all our facilities, 18 facilities, and we monitor usage of energy in all the stuff. And last year itself, we were able to reduce 24% of our energy just by monitoring and putting into act basis utilization and other parameters. So again, 3 factors: commit, act, monitor. And I do want to sort of pass on, and I know I'm the only one stopping you from dinner, so I just wanted to end, but happy to interact at dinner with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Very crisp message: commit, act, monitor. Crisp and sharp. I would now like to invite Mr. Girish Sethi, Senior Director TERI, for the concluding remarks.
So, thanks, Manish. So, in fact, I am now the last speaker before the dinner session. Thanks, I think, to Capgemini. I think they are sponsoring the dinner, so I really don't want to annoy you and your team. Let me just start very briefly and saying that this session actually is titled Accelerating Business Actions for Realizing SDGs. And I would like to acknowledge the fact that I think all of us have mostly talked about climate and carbon. But I also come from energy. I've been working in this field for almost 35 years, but I just realized that I think the other 2 topics within the SDGs, and my colleague Anshuman is sitting on the first dais, according to me, water and waste are 2 important subjects which do figure very much in our all SDGs. But I think to me, these are really very important topics, and we always tend to forget in all the discussions when it comes to SDGs. I just wanted to acknowledge this on behalf of everybody. And I personally believe, I think the first thing which we do in the morning when we get up is brush our teeth. And if water is not going to come in the taps, that is more of a problem than if the light doesn't come, it's still okay. So I think I just wanted to acknowledge this point. Anyway, I think moving forward, I just wanted to also go back to the note which was circulated, which I'm sure most of you have not read it. And it basically says again, because the title talks about the business actions for realizing SDGs, and I just want to read 2 sentences out of that. Business sector can play a very important role in providing the much needed support in terms of technology development, propelling innovation and finance. We have talked about all the 3 topics in this, all the speakers. And the next one says innovation is limited not only to the new breakthrough technologies, but also to incremental improvements and adaptations in existing technologies, practices, and processes. So to me, I think these are very important sentences when we are looking at the private sector. And to me, what I believe is that the answer to all these problems actually lies with the private sector, with the corporate sector broadly, because the technologies, it is the private sector, it is the corporate sector which is actually developing the technology, and it is really the corporate sector, the business sector, which is actually going to use the technology. Even in this session we had people like Capgemini, he mentioned about the 6 areas. They are the ones who are going to develop the technologies, the platforms, the tools to measure the GHG emissions, scope 1, scope 2. And there are, even in this session, we have the steel industry chairperson here. They are going to implement all these technologies. So I think the answers are here mostly with the corporate sector in most of the cases. Of course, we need the policy actions, we need the financial community to support, have a facilitative process to really let the businesses function and prosper. But I think the answers to me are primarily with the corporate sector if we are talking about even on the net zero reaching by 2070 or 2050. I also would like to just briefly mention, I think, and thanks to Rasmus, I think, and we always tend to talk about the large companies, big sectors, steel, cement have figured in this discussion. But we always tend to forget the SMEs, and I thank him. I think he brought this subject of SMEs into the fore. And coming back to the subject of SDGs, and if we look at those 17 SDGs, the SDGs like we have the economic growth, SDG 8, I think, and SDG 9. All these talk about economic growth, inclusiveness, and SMEs are really the engines of growth in all the countries, whether it's the developed countries or the developed countries. And in a country like India, we are talking about, I think, the Ministry of MSME talks about 120 million jobs by the SMEs, and they are the engines of growth for almost all parts of the country wherever we go. So to me, I think it's extremely important to really focus on the value chains for the large, when we're talking about large companies, but also focus so much on the SMEs. And finally, I would just like to end by saying that from my perspective, I have been working mostly in the energy field, as I mentioned, with the industries. And to me, I think 3 or 4 things which actually are key takeaways from my experience of all these years of working in TERI for the last so many years, is that we need to definitely continue focusing on the short-term measures. We still can't say that we are the best in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of adoption of renewable energy. There are many sectors where almost 15 to 20% options exist for energy efficiency improvement. So enhance focus on efficiency, renewables, circularity. These are the low-hanging fruits we should keep on talking. But whether it's India or rest of the world, I think, and we have been working as TERI in many other developing countries in Africa and other parts of the world as well. So that's the first one. The second, of course, is I think we have to start seriously thinking on this deep carbonation. Thanks, I think at least the discussions on hydrogen, green hydrogen, CCUS are figuring in all these conferences. 5 years back, this was not the case. And thanks to the huge announcement by the Government of India on the green hydrogen mission. So it's good to see that discussions have started. And in that regard, I would say that from on pilots, on demonstration plants in these kind of hard-to-abate sectors like steel and cement, where if you actually have to reach to those targets in 2050, 2070, you need those pilots. Somebody needs to prove to me that, yes, a hydrogen DRI plant works. It gives me that steel. But it's also important to see that, yes, we also need to, as whether it is the government has to push in the money or the private sector has to come in, we talk about climate finance available. I always wonder why can't the climate finance, I think this is for our chair Manish, so why can't the climate finance be directed towards setting up a small pilot facility of hydrogen DRI in India? So why can't we have GCF coming in and putting up a plant there? So these are the things which are important for us, I think, to really look at. solar is anyway, I think solar wind is a clear case. It's a win-win situation. But it is for these new technologies which we really need to invest time and effort to really show to the developing world. India is a country which is going to, I think the national steel policy talked about tripling the steel capacity in, 10 years or something like that, 2.5 times, I think, the steel capacity in India from 300 million tons, I guess. So I think that's where I think we really need, and the same story with the cement, infrastructure is going to grow. So these are the areas I think which we need to really focus on. And thanks everybody for...
TERI along with Capgemini is jointly releasing a concept. TERI along with Capgemini is jointly releasing a concept note on emission reduction and beyond at the hub after the session, along with an MOU signing between the two organizations. We'll have Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General TERI, and Mr. Sandeep Bhatia, Managing Director, Capgemini in MENT, India, to do the honors. I request all of you to kindly proceed towards the hub and join us for dinner afterwards. Thank you and have a lovely evening.